I've been discriminated against my whole life because of my golden child sister. Finally, I got my sweet revenge on my wedding day. I faced discrimination my entire life because of my golden child sister, and she even tried to walk down the aisle at my wedding. Finally, I got my revenge. My parents always favored my sister, and they were pretty open about it. If she accused me of something, they'd believe her and punish me, but if I accused her, even with undeniable proof, they'd give her a lighter punishment and find a way to scold me, too. My birthday cake always had to be her favorite flavor, and my parents pretended they didn't know I hated it. They always bought her more than me and took us where she wanted, even if it was supposed to be about me. My sister grew up spoiled and used me as a punching bag. At first, she mostly ignored me, but things got worse when we were teens. She ended up with no friends, and her behavior got worse. Did her friends move away or ditch her because she was mean? I don't know, because we were never close. My parents boasted about her achievements, but never mentioned any issues, whereas she used the fact that I had no friends to tease me. I only knew she had no friends because we went to the same school, and I noticed she was no longer hanging out with people. Meanwhile, I was fairly popular. My sister realized this and suddenly turned me from an occasional punching bag to someone she needed to take down constantly. She started accusing me and my friends of more things. My parents stopped letting me hang out with anyone, with excuses like, "They're not good people according to your sister," or "Why are you trying to leave us?" and "Why can't you be like your sister?" I really enjoyed spending time with my family. What really helped me get through it was my extended family. Most of them lived in the same town, and I got on well with my cousins. Even though we were all different ages. At one of our get-togethers, they invited me to something, but I don't really remember what. When they asked me why I couldn't go, I just said that I wasn't allowed to have friends because my sister didn't have any. The adults heard about this and, I think, told my parents. Later on, I was told off for lying and not allowed to go out for a month, but after that, they were kind of flexible, so it was worth it. My sister changed schools. I guess the humiliation of our extended family knowing her social status was too much, so she demanded to switch, and my parents immediately obliged, even though it cost them more, since the school was further away. She made friends at the new school, but she never went back, mostly ignoring me, having felt the power to mess with me and being angry that I told the family she had no friends. She never let me go. My life remained difficult. Her friends would come over and my parents called it light teasing, but it was bullying. I never invited friends over because my parents were rubbish hosts, or my sister would accuse them of stealing and my parents would believe her. I did become close to my cousins, though, as my parents never dared to treat family that way. Then I got my first boyfriend. I didn't want to bring him home, but my parents insisted. At one point, we were separated and he came to find me to tell me my sister was flirting with him. She came over in skimpy clothing, batting her eyelashes, and started telling him how bad I was. And how good she was. He was annoyed and ran off to find me, of course. My sister told my parents a different story, that my boyfriend had tried to flirt with her, but she naturally refused, since she couldn't do that to me. I can guess who my parents believed. My boyfriend wasn't perfect, but I immediately believed him, for a mean reason. Remember, I was a teenager suffering from unfair treatment. I was very resentful and moody and hated my sister as much as she hated me. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about looks. I hadn't mentioned them yet because they weren't. I didn't think they were relevant, though. My parents were overweight and loved showing love via food, giving more food, buying treats, etc. My sister was also overweight, but I wasn't. I've always been kind of skinny because punishment often included no treats or snacks. Obviously, weight isn't what matters, personality is. But my sister, even then, was already rude and spoiled. Even her flirting attempts were bad because she never learned to work for anything since she could demand and my parents would deliver. Added to that, the fact that she didn't look like some sexy model. Even myself, I was a teenager, and I didn't think my boyfriend would cheat on me with her. My parents said I shouldn't date him. I tried to keep going in secret, but it was hard, and the relationship ended. I dated another boyfriend, but my sister accused him of flirting with her when he refused her advances. My parents believed her. I tried to explain, but they decided my girlfriend's parents weren't too happy with my boyfriend and said I shouldn't date him. I tried to keep going in secret, but it was hard and the relationship ended. I got another boyfriend, but my sister accused him of flirting with her when he refused her advances. My parents believed her. I tried to point out how this happened again, but they decided that I was incapable of making good choices and kept picking bad boyfriends. The relationship couldn't handle the Romeo and Juliet situation and fizzled out again. I was called in high school because I was fine with making out with boys and such, but refused to have relationships. Thankfully, it never got back to my sister or parents. My sister did bring one boyfriend home during all this time. He was paraded with pride. I couldn't make good choices and kept picking bad boyfriends. The relationship couldn't handle the whole Romeo and Juliet thing and it fizzled out again. I was called in high school because I was fine with making out with boys but refused to have relationships. Thankfully, it never got back to my sister or parents. My sister did bring one boyfriend home during this time and he was paraded with pride. My parents spent every second telling me how good he was and why I couldn't be like my sister and find myself someone like that. Then he stopped showing up and suddenly he was a conniving bastard who tricked my sister. Oh well. The unequal treatment continued. At this time, she had more spending money and her curfews were much better than mine. She was free to go anywhere at any time, while I couldn't. If I pointed it out, my parents would say it's because she's older, but when I reached that age, I still didn't have the same treatment she had. When I pointed it out, they denied they ever said that or claimed it was because I couldn't be trusted. Like she was using my sister's accusations against my boyfriend and friends as proof of my bad judgment. Time goes by, and it's time for my sister to graduate. She was accepted into a college, not a very well. When I was at secondary school, my parents would say it was because she was older, but I never got the same treatment. When I pointed it out, they denied ever saying it, and said it was because I couldn't be trusted. They also used my sister's accusations against my boyfriend and friends as proof of my bad judgment. Time went by, and it was time for my sister to graduate. She was accepted into a college that wasn't very well regarded, and she had no scholarship or anything again, only her achievements were told to me. I don't know which colleges she applied to, so I can't say how badly she was rejected. I do know her grades were bad in school, though, because whenever she got a B, we would celebrate. I usually got good grades, but my parents refused to celebrate, claiming that there was nothing to celebrate. My parents made a lot of a fuss and told her they'd pay for everything. I was relieved she was leaving, but it didn't make my life any easier. She'd come home every other weekend and somehow stuff kept disappearing from my room or she'd find some other way to make my life miserable. My curfews were still strict. Eventually, my mom came to talk to me about my graduation. I'm only a year younger than my sister, and she told me that, since they were paying for my sister's college, they didn't have any money to pay for mine. I think it'd be better for me to start working straight away after I graduate and wait until my sister's finished at university to see if they can afford something for me also. If I decide to stay at home, I'll have to pay for all my stuff, part of the bills and rent. I told them I could get student loans, but they said no because they were so caring towards me and they thought I had such bad judgment that they'd decide if a college was worth getting into debt for. I'm not sure how they didn't want to give me a loan, but I didn't ask. They didn't mention scholarships, they didn't know what my grades were anymore and they never believed in my capabilities anyway. I didn't bat an eyelid, I simply said, okay. My mum clearly didn't expect that and kept crying. Maybe she hoped I'd throw a tantrum so they'd have an excuse to never pay for my college, but I said nothing except that I understood their position, thanked them for caring and that was that. My dad later tried the same, but I just couldn't get emotionally involved, after seeing how they'd parented me my whole life I never expected anything from my education. I knew they'd find a way to not pay for it and make my life hell. I never thought they'd pay eventually if I worked and waited for my sister to graduate. I'd been preparing for college for ages. I could barely go out, and my friends were few and far between. So I had loads of time to study. I did because I saw college as my only option. I'd spent my whole life being made to feel like I wasn't good enough by my parents, so I didn't expect anything from them when it came to my education. I knew they'd find a way to not pay for my education and make my life miserable. I never thought they'd eventually pay if I worked and waited for my sister to graduate. I'd been preparing for college for ages. I barely had time to socialize because I had so much study. But I did see college as my only chance to be free. Well, the time came, and I worked my ass off and got a scholarship. It wasn't to a place like Ivy League or anything like law or medical school, but it was a good enough course in a decent college with a full scholarship. Knowing my sister would hate it and try to stop me via my parents, I put my achievement on social media at the same time. I told them, even forcing myself to thank them in the post. Now they couldn't forbid me from going, as they'd have to explain to my family were all like, why not, at first, and they even bragged a bit. But then, I guess my sister got to them, and they totally changed their minds. They even asked me if I was sure I wanted to go. They let slip that my sister wasn't doing so well in college, and since she was smarter and had better judgment than me, they thought I'd suffer more. But I stuck to my guns, and they weren't happy, but they couldn't do anything about it. College was my savior. I started being happy again, and I still contacted my parents and visited them. I didn't go on holiday much during this time because I couldn't afford it, but I could excuse not going a lot because of money. I avoided introducing any man to my parents, and my sister stopped going to college. I know she didn't graduate because they would have made a big fuss about it. She moved back home and paid nothing. She was paying no bills or rent, but my parents said it was different. They started working at the same company as my mum, obviously thanks to my mum pulling strings. This was all presented to me as a point of pride, almost there. I promise I met my husband around this time. You know, those people who say if I were in that situation, I'd have. My parents said that it's not the same as paying bills or rent, but it's different. They started working at the same company as my mum, obviously thanks to my mum pulling strings. This was all presented to me as a point of pride. Almost there, I promise I met my husband around this time. You know those people who say if I were in that situation, I'd have done something. My husband is the type who actually does. I'm the type who is meek and submissive in any situation and then can't sleep at night, wishing I had done something, having thought of something witty to say, etc. I'm the person who can't help but cry when I'm angry. My husband is the guy who claps back immediately. He loves drama and loves to resolve it. He's the guy that if he doesn't immediately reply to a slight, you better start worrying because he won't forgive and forget, he's just doing something worse for revenge. He's the one who wanted me to post here and wanted to post on a nuclear revenge board too, but decided what we did wasn't nuclear. People were baffled that I got together with him, but just because I was incapable of acting like him due to my upbringing, it didn't mean I didn't like it. I love that my husband does what I can and he treats people well as long as they do the same to him. When we discussed marriage, we decided we didn't care that much about the ceremony because of our budget, so we'd rather spend on a dream trip to Europe for our honeymoon. As for where to do it, since his family was spread out and mine was still mostly concentrated in my hometown, we decided to do it there. We weren't living too far off either, so we could take some long trips during the weekends to manage stuff, and there was some work flexibility, so we could stay in my hometown for a bit too if needed. We sent out the engagement announcement and the save the date for a few months later. At this point, my parents naturally demanded to meet my man. I wanted to grow. I wanted to toughen up and refuse, but I was finding it hard. The distance had made me think maybe my parents weren't so bad. Well, my husband looked like I had cancelled Christmas when I told him I would at least ensure they were never alone with him. See, he had been getting ready for this. He even bought a high-quality recorder. I was feeling a bit unsure about the whole thing, to be honest. I thought my parents might be a bit of a handful, but I was trying to reassure myself that they weren't so bad after all. I mean, my husband had been preparing for this for a while, and he even bought a top-quality recorder. He could hide it in his pocket and record everything. He was really excited about all the ways he could rebuff my sister's advances, insult her, and then spread the recording of her attempts to my family. So, off he went, all excited and raring to meet them. He came back later, totally euphoric, and told me, babe, you won't believe the awful things they wanted, babe, we can screw them over so bad. There are so many possibilities. I was confused and wanted to hear the recording, but he told me it was better to listen to him first, or else I'd misunderstand him well. He went there, and instead of flirting, my parents and my sister sat him down after some. They wanted to get one over on them, so I thought it'd be a good idea to let them know that they could have the wedding at my venue, and they could have their cake and eat it too. My husband-to-be was a bit miffed, but he's a smart guy, so he knew it'd be better to listen to me first. He told me that he wasn't okay with my parents and my sister being there, and that he wasn't okay with me being in charge. They said they'd pay for the wedding, but only if my sister walked down the aisle. My parents were insistent that my sister should walk down the aisle at my wedding, and that she should wear a wedding dress. They said it wasn't okay for a younger sister to do that. They were all like, I'm not okay with him, and I'm not paying for the wedding. But then they changed their tune, saying they'd still pay if my sister walked down the aisle. My parents were like, no way. First, she's got to walk down the aisle in a wedding dress. They said it wasn't fair for a younger sister to get the first kiss. So, they said it was only fair if my sister had the experience of it at my venue, with pictures being taken in the dress, and she'd even have a cake later. Now, my husband's all like, hey, vengeful husband here. Hell hath no fury like a pro-revenge instant karma nuclear revenge lurker. When his beloved is scorned, that said, as much as my wife, she's my wife now. I paint myself as this quick-witted dude. I admit my neurons all but short-circuited when those folks legit suggested that, like, some sort of great gift even Troy would rather take in the horse a second time. I think, alas, after my brain. When my wife was upset, I told her that I'd like to see my parents get their just desserts. I even had a list of insults ready, but then I felt like maybe it wasn't the best idea. I decided to go and see how my wife and fiancé would react, and then I left before I could tell my parents what I was planning. I did have a whole list of insults ready to spew out, but something in my soul whispered in my ear, telling me to string these idiots along. So I said I needed to think, see how my fiancé would react, and then ran out of there before I could give away my evil plans to my wife. My husband then sincerely recounted how my parents wanted my wedding to be about my sister, with a grin on his face, and the recording to prove it. I was shocked that the distance had softened how badly they treated me, and I thought that even they wouldn't go so far. Thankfully, my husband insisted on the angle of revenge. My husband was so persuasive that I didn't end up feeling too bitter. We had a great time coming up with ways to mess with them, from the outrageous to the more realistic. Then, when we had a plan, we called his more sensible brother. The plan was to give them the wrong address of one of the venues, etc. His more level-headed brother told us off for it, but he admitted he'd never be able to stop us getting revenge. He did, though, show us that it'd be hard to pull off. Some of our other ideas could have got us sued, so we settled for the least harmful plan. Brother-in-law told us off for it, but he admitted he'd never be able to convince us to avoid getting revenge. He also said that trying to stop us would be tricky. Some of our other ideas could get us sued, so we settled for the least risky option. We agreed to act like we were cool with it, but then hire security and not let her in. Obviously, if that was all it was, it wouldn't be pro-revenge. Most of the rest is down to my husband, but he wants me to do the honors, so here goes. Just to be clear, everything he did was already discussed with me, and they were our mutual. I'm going to pretend we're agreed, but I'm not going to let her in. If that was all it was, it wouldn't be pro-revenge. Most of the rest is down to my husband, but he wants me to take charge, so here goes. Just to be clear, everything he did was already discussed with me and we agreed on it together. He went back to my parents, said he checked and thought I wouldn't be okay with it. But he didn't see the issue. He'd be willing to help them, as he doesn't want the family to fall apart. He pointed out that I don't like conflict, so if I was surprised, I might not have a tantrum in front of them. He said he'd asked my parents and they thought I wouldn't be okay with it. But he didn't see the issue, and he thought that not wanting the family to fall apart would be helpful. He said that I don't like conflict, so if I was surprised, I might not throw a tantrum. On the other hand, marriage is a big thing, so who knows if I'd lash out. So he suggested a compromise: they'd help pay for stuff, and I'd feel even more pressure to not say anything. Not only would we be public with our families, but I'd be grateful for the help they gave. He said my parents looked shocked and my grown sister literally started skipping with joy like a kid, so it was accepted. Importantly, my husband also claimed that due to some bad judgment and past boyfriends, these words were all my idea, and I'm so proud of using their words against them. I was. My parents looked shocked and my older sister literally started skipping with joy like a kid, so it was accepted. My husband also claimed that due to some bad judgment and past boyfriends, these words were all my idea. I'm so proud of using their words against them. I was distrustful and controlling and liked to check his phone to ensure he wasn't cheating on me. As such, it was imperative that nothing of this plan was ever put in writing for any discussion pertaining to my sister walking down the aisle before Mehe went over to their house to talk, and so began the months. It was a pretty rocky relationship. My parents and sister thought they were tricking me while my husband and I were milking them rather than paying for the wedding. They lay low, of course. My parents wanted to be involved in everything, even some things that meant a lot to me, like the songs and color palette. My husband would convince them to let it go to keep me in line, but since we never really cared for the ceremony to begin with, everything else was fair game, or so they thought. There's what we did. We'd go to check the drink and menu options and then accept the lowest or second lowest priced option. My husband would then my sister and I were secretly taken there to try it out, and then we'd sigh and say, it's a pity we don't want to take advantage of my parents' goodwill, so we won't get the best options. Then my sister would demand that my parents pay for the best option, and my parents would tell me not to worry, and that they'd pay for the most expensive option. We'd done the whole thing with the photographer and flowers. My husband gave my sister a bouquet of the flowers we wanted and sadly said he wanted some other flowers. My parents told me they wanted us to go with those and they'd pay for it. When it came to the wedding dress, we hit a snag. We had a bit of a disagreement about the dress. My parents wanted me to wear a dress they had picked out, which wasn't terrible but wasn't really my style and wouldn't suit me. We were going to agree to use it and then not use it, but my mum sent me a message about it, so there'd be proof. I said okay. We had to go with me refusing to text. There was a bit of a mix-up. My parents wanted me to wear a dress that I didn't like, but I said no. We had planned to say yes and then not use it, but my mum sent me a message about it so there'd be proof. I said I'd stand my ground and refused to text. My husband went over there and said he'd see what he could do. My sister suggested ruining my desired dress so I'd be forced to wear the other one. He pretended to agree. During all this time, they kept communications outside any text. We made sure that happened by having me reply to my sister tried messaging my husband, which made it clear that he was being uncontrolling and neurotic. They believed him and never risked anything in writing. Some people might not like the thought of their partner going around talking badly about them to family, but I'm such a doormat that the thought of being painted as this controlling and dangerous person is extremely funny to me. I egged him on to do it. I guess I have a warped sense of humor. Oh, and my sister did try to flirt with him, but he acted conflicted to really sell the idea that he was with them. My husband would pretend I found out that he'd been talking to them about security without telling me, and he never told them that we'd hired it. My husband and I had thought about a courthouse wedding to save money on our honeymoon, but ended up having this really fancy wedding and barely spent any money. We called it back to pay for emotional damages from my parents. I think my husband's okay. He just confirmed I'm right. He was enjoying the whole trick more than planning our wedding. I didn't think it was possible to witness a guy beaming at the thought of wasting his whole Saturday doing a car trip to discuss wedding details with his my parents have caused me so much emotional damage. I think my husband is okay though. He just confirmed that I'm right. He was enjoying the whole trick more than planning our wedding. I didn't think it was possible to witness a guy beaming at the thought of wasting his whole Saturday doing a car trip to discuss wedding details with his in-laws, but here we are soon, the day came. The plan my parents, sister and husband had come up with was to wait until everyone was seated, since the bride always comes out late. They'd have my sister arrive at that precise time to avoid me seeing her and trying to stop her, and she'd walk down the aisle. By the time I heard what happened, it would be too late to do anything. As for my dress, we saved some of the leftover fabric from my dress alterations. So, the day finally arrived. The plan my parents' sister and husband had come up with was to wait until everyone was seated, since the bride always comes out late. They'd have my sister arrive at that precise time to avoid me seeing her and trying to stop her, and she'd walk down the aisle. By the time I heard what happened, it would be too late to do anything. As for my dress, we saved some of the leftover fabric from my dress alterations. My husband took that to my parents' place, where my sister still lives with them. He showed them as proof that he'd ruined the dress, then said he had to go back to me as I was raging and he needed to calm me down. He told them he'd see them at the wedding. We made sure to keep our real security hidden initially, as the guests and my parents arrived. They only saw a woman with a list of names to check. Only after my parents had settled in did we bring out my husband took that to my parents' place. My sister still lives with them and showed them the dress, saying it had been ruined. Then she said she had to go back to him, as I was getting agitated and he needed to calm me down. She told them she'd see them at the wedding. We made sure to keep our actual security hidden initially, as the guests and my parents arrived. They only saw a woman with a list of names to check. Only after my parents had settled in did we bring out the actual security, a guy who looked like a bodyguard. We instructed him not to let my sister in and promised a generous tip if he kept our instructions confidential. Soon, the moment arrived. My parents got a text that my sister was less than 5 minutes away, so my dad signaled for the ceremony to start. My bridesmaids had been prepositioned to follow his lead, so they did without checking with me. After they all took their places, my dad stood at the entrance, waiting. During this time, a friend who wasn't in the wedding party texted me to get ready, in case my husband or bridesmaids started texting this friend. My husband's friend was as eager to stir up drama as he was and didn't mind not being a bridesmaid. Soon as my dad took his position, the bridal song began, the doors opened and I entered. My dad was shocked to see me. He tried to look behind me, but couldn't see the entrance to the venue from where we were. So he didn't have a clue what had happened to my sister. Then his phone rang. I saw the caller ID and it was her. He left me with a mumbled message, and gasps and confusion filled the room. The friend on the plan loudly asked what had happened. I lied and said, tearfully, that he had told me it wasn't supposed to be me there. My husband and I had agreed that if my dad abandoned me, I should say that to make him look as bad as possible. The tears weren't just for show. I was really upset, trying not to cry, when my friend loudly asked what he meant by, "It shouldn't be you." Everyone could hear her, and she said she'd go and check, then ran off. We'd planned it so she could create chaos with the security and prevent my dad from returning to stop the ceremony. Eventually, my mom also left. At this point, my husband's dad quickly ran over and took my arm. He'd been forewarned that he might need to be there. I was really upset and trying not to cry. My friend then loudly asked what he meant by "it shouldn't be you," so that everyone could hear and spread the word. Then she said, "I'll go and check," and ran off. We'd planned this so she could create chaos with the security and prevent my dad from returning to stop the ceremony. Eventually, my mom also left. At this point, my husband's dad quickly ran over and took my arm. He'd been forewarned he might need to run to me. I smiled when I saw him. I walked down the aisle to whispers as people discussed what had happened. Some left to check as well. When I reached my husband, all was well. He comforted me, joking that my sad face was so real, I deserved an Oscar. He reassured me he'd deal with my parents for what they did. We got married without any further issues. My parents didn't come back. I noticed a lot of people leaving and returning during the party, but no, I was really touched by the effort that had gone into the wedding. I was on my way to the aisle when I saw my dad, who was having a bit of a moan. He was telling everyone what had happened. Some people were checking what was going on too. When I got to my husband, he was fine. He joked that I looked so upset that I deserved an Oscar, and he said he'd sort things out with my parents. We got married without any more problems. My parents didn't come back. I saw a lot of people leaving and coming back during the party, but no one was saying what was going on. Someone told me what was happening. Someone whispered in my husband's ear and he went out. He came back later with a look on his face like he was about to burst out laughing, but he whispered to me that he needed to go and hide. Then he started smiling. Here's what my friends, family, the security guy and my husband told me afterwards. My sister arrived in a wedding dress, but the security guard wouldn't let her in. He told her she had to be there. So, one person finally told me what was going on. Someone whispered something in my husband's ear, and he went out. He came back a bit later with a really angry look on his face, but then he whispered to me that he needed to go hide. Before he could even talk properly, he started smiling. So, here's what my friends, family, the security guy and my husband told me. My sister showed up in a wedding dress. The security guard wouldn't let her in, saying she had to be at the wrong venue because there was already a bride. Yes, we tipped him very well, as promised. My dad tried to threaten him with the police, saying he'd never heard of him and couldn't be working there. The security guard agreed to call the police, since he was hired by us and was just doing his job. My dad realized it would be too late and tried to demand that he let my sister in. At this point, the friend came over, started shouting and insulting my sister. He was asking what was going on and basically stalling. My mum soon arrived, followed by others. By then, the wedding plan was ruined. All my parents could do now was try and salvage the situation, as everyone who learned about it was horrified. They tried to argue that it wasn't a secret and blamed my husband when he was called over. He put on his best confused look and denied everything, saying, "My mum was there, and she was basically asking what was going on," which just made things worse. Then the others turned up. By then, the wedding plan was ruined. All my parents could do now was try and keep things under control. Everyone who found out was horrified. People started screaming and shouting at them. The three of them said it wasn't a secret and blamed my husband. When he was called over, my husband looked as confused as could be and denied everything. He said he'd never agreed to such a ridiculous plan. They insisted he had, so he demanded proof, but they couldn't provide any. All the text messages they could show were about normal wedding decisions. My sister was screaming and crying, and apparently she was sat on the floor kicking her legs like a child. My dad looked like he wanted to hit my husband, but security and other people held him back. He was like, "No way was I ever going to agree to some stupid plan like that," and wouldn't back down. He kept asking for proof, and of course, they couldn't give it to him. All the text messages they showed were about normal wedding stuff. My sister was screaming, crying, and basically sat on the floor kicking her legs like a child. My dad looked like he wanted to hit my husband, but security and everyone else held him back. They claimed they had no proof because my husband told them not to text him. He just laughed and said, "Wow, how convenient, huh?" Then he repeated, "Why would I ever agree to something so messed up?" He had a go at them for being terrible parents and said he wasn't going to let their stupid plans and lies ruin his wedding. Then he came back to me. No one believed them. The venue had cameras, but they wouldn't show me the recording, as it was only for security purposes. They said they had no proof because my husband told them not to text him. He laughed and said, "Wow, how convenient, huh?" and then repeated why he wouldn't agree to something so messed up. He ripped into them about being terrible parents and said he wasn't going to let their stupid plans and lies ruin his wedding. Then he came back to me. No one believed them. The venue had cameras, but they wouldn't show me the recording, as it was only for security purposes. However, some people filmed parts of it, watching my parents and sister get torn apart by everyone who came out to see the drama. After years of being accused of things and not being believed, seeing them get a taste of their own medicine was one of the best wedding gifts. My mother was crying, my dad kept changing from purple to white, and my sister was still on the floor, crying and screaming. They kept insisting that my husband was in. on it, but people kept asking why he would agree, why there was no proof, and why they wanted my sister to do this at my wedding. They had no good answers. Eventually, they were told to leave and had no choice but to do so. My dad apparently had to drag my sister up as she refused to leave the ground again. People said nothing to me all night. I guess they wanted to spare me, and maybe it's because I was the bride and not just a guest for once, but it felt like everyone was making an extra effort to be nice, positive and excited about everything. My husband says all the expensive food and drinks they were eating certainly helped, lol. We had a blast. My husband kept up the forced angry face for only a short while before breaking out in smiles again. After that, we went to the hotel to catch some sleep before heading off on our honeymoon. Speaking of which, my parents did try to pay for our plane tickets, but we thought that was risky as they could try to cancel them or something, so we refused. Since then, the three of them have tried to contact me, but I've refused calls because my husband insisted on keeping a paper trail, which was a smart move because my sister eventually messaged me. I won't repeat what she said, as it was very unhinged and didn't make much sense, but the important part was that she blamed me for her humiliation, called my husband a two. We didn't want to buy the tickets because we thought it might get us into trouble, like being cancelled or something. Since then, my sister and her family have tried to contact me a few times. I've been avoiding their calls because my husband says it's better to keep a record of everything. That was a smart move because my sister eventually sent me a message. I won't repeat what she said because it was really out of order and didn't make much sense, but the important part was that she blamed me for her humiliation, called my husband a two-faced snake who had fooled them for months, and wanted to print and hang that on our wall, lol. She also said that she was sure I'd get cheated on by him. She even suggested that he was cheating on me with her. My husband took a screenshot of the call logs, my sister's messages, and some messages from my parents on my phone. He then sent it all to. He tricked them for months. He wants to print and put that on our wall, lol. He hoped, but he was also certain that I'd get cheated on by him. He even suggested that he was cheating on me with her. My husband took my phone screenshot, the call logs, my sister's messages and some messages from my parents demanding that I pick up the phone and send it all to our family group chat. He also sent screenshots of messages to him where they called him names and threatened him, but he kept up the year-long delusional "I never agreed to anything, I never said that," and I even threatened to sue them for defamation and harassment. He wrote a message in a group chat begging my family for help as I was now being harassed by them constantly. He begged them to stop my parents and sister from ruining our honeymoon, after they'd already tried to ruin our wedding. He ended with a request that they not share our locations to stop my parents from sending my sister over and claiming he'd agreed to pretend to sleep with her in our honeymoon suite, lol. My family assured him they'd handle it. And since then, we've had peace. My husband is a bit disappointed that my sister didn't disobey so he could call her out again while tearing her a new one. We'll see if the peace lasts. All in all, while I would have preferred a normal, loving family at my wedding, at least for once in my life, they not only failed to ruin something meaningful to me, but I got, and ever since then, we've had peace. My husband's a bit disappointed that my sister didn't disobey so he could call her out again, while having a go at her. We'll see if it lasts. Overall, while I would have preferred a normal, loving family at my wedding, at least for once in my life, they not only failed to ruin something meaningful to me, but I got back at them. Extra info: do I know why they treat me like this? I've been asked this question a lot, so I assume you all will wonder the same. I've pondered this all my life and still don't know. I tried asking when I was young, but they denied any difference and scolded me for being spoiled, so I stopped trying. I've considered many possibilities, but based on my observations, I think it's this: I was unplanned. They took a while to have my sister, so she was not only wanted but also like a miracle child after so long. However, given our small age difference, I think they didn't expect to have another child so soon or easily and didn't use adequate protection after my sister's birth. Maybe they didn't realize my mum's so. Here's what I think. I was unplanned, and it took them ages to have my sister, so they really wanted her and thought she was a miracle. But because of the age difference, they didn't expect to have another child so soon or easily, and they didn't use adequate protection after my sister's birth. Maybe they didn't realize my mom was pregnant until it was too late, so they ended up with an unplanned baby while still dealing with a newborn. They're not well off, so having the extra expense probably didn't help, and they resented me. But that's just my guess. Anyway, I've accepted that the reason doesn't matter. What they did to me was unwarranted. Was pregnant until it was too late, so they ended up with an unplanned baby while still dealing with a newborn. They're not well off, so having the extra expense probably didn't help, and they resented me. But that's just my guess. Anyway, I've accepted that the reason won't truly matter. What they did to me was unwarranted. Do you really think this would work? My husband and I have a theory that they never intended to do this at all. We think my sister threw a tantrum over me getting married first, when she barely gets dates, and they made my husband that outlandish proposal. They didn't want to pay for my wedding and didn't think we'd accept it, or that it would even look good for them to do it by suggesting it. I really think this will work. My husband and I have a theory that they never intended to do this at all. We think my sister threw a tantrum over me getting married first, even though she barely gets dates. They made my husband that outlandish proposal because they didn't want to pay for my wedding and didn't think we'd accept it. They also thought it would look bad for them to do it by suggesting it. By refusing, they could look like the good guys to my sister, while having an excuse not to give me a dime. But then my husband accepted it, and they couldn't backtrack without risking my sister turning on them. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.